Michael Wall Garden Theatre at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. My name is Karl. I'm the Education and Community Outreach Officer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the latest installment of Watson's World, A Legacy Unfolds, an introduction to the life, work, and contributions of the late Karl Stewart Watson. Before we go on, we'd like to recognize his brother Patrick, who is with us this evening. And we are very, very happy to have you. Karl played a very important role at the museum, as well as in academic Barbados in general. And it is very fitting that we're going to have this tribute this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge our speaker this evening. She'll get a proper introduction from our chair, but Ambassador Sonja Welch is the sister of the late Pedro Welch, who has also recently passed. We're not doing well with historians this year. And his birthday was yesterday. I don't know who else remembered, but I got up in the morning and I was like, charboy. And I suppose in keeping with not leaving anyone out, I would also like to recognize it has been a hard year for us all with the passing as well of Trevor Marshall. This evening's topic is, I think, particularly relevant given these interesting times we are living in. I think that is getting kind of difficult to keep track of how the tariffs have changed between yesterday and today and this morning and this afternoon. But this evening, Ambassador Welch is going to be talking about Watson's contributions, diplomatic and consular representation overseas is the title of the lecture. And her chairperson for this evening, our chairperson for this evening is Director General for Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Her Excellency Ms. Donna Michelle Ford. She is a career diplomat, a linguist, and a public administrator who has spent over 30 years in diplomacy with the Barbados Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade. She currently serves as Director General for Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, overseeing the development, interpretation, implementation, and delivery of Barbados' foreign policy. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in French and Spanish from the UWI-KPhil and recently received the inaugural Distinguished Alumni Award for her achievements in diplomacy. She is a Rosing Fellow and holds a Master's in Public Administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. The Director General also holds a Master of Science in International Service from American University, Washington, D.C., and a Diploma in Political Studies from the Institut d'études politiques in Paris. As Barbados' first resident ambassador to Cuba, the Director General deepened engagement with Cubans of Barbadian descent and increased cooperation with the Cuban government in culture, trade, biomedical collaboration, and tourism. She also served as the ministry's Deputy Permanent Secretary with responsible for human resources and administration. Before becoming Director General, Ms. Ford also served on secondment to the Caribbean Community CARICOM Secretariat as Assistant Secretary General for Foreign and Community Relations. Ms. Ford is passionate about foreign affairs and political studies, and she is committed to strengthening Barbados' bilateral and multilateral partnerships and to preserving Barbados' foreign policy impulse, friends of all, satellites of none. Famous quote, of course, from the late Earl Walton Barrow. I would like at this time to welcome Ms. Ford to the podium. It's a pleasure to have you all with us this evening, and I'm sure that you're looking forward to hearing about Karl's exploits as much as I am.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm Donna Ford, introduction already made. And it is a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon to be the chairperson of this session. And I'd like to welcome you all for coming out. And also, it is a pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce Sonja Welch. But please indulge me for a moment to tell you how I met Sonja. Because frankly, were it not for Sonja, I would not be here this evening. Many years ago, when I was a student at the University of the West Indies, Amparo Marquardt was one of my Spanish lecturers back then. I had the good fortune, the opportunity to be interviewed for a program which was a part of Barbados's technical cooperation, France's technical cooperation with Barbados, issued to students of the University of the West Indies. And I was selected with another Barbadian to go to France as a teaching assistant. And back then, the route to Paris was through Brussels. And I remember leaving Barbados on what was Ghana Airways at the time because of a code share agreement with Barbados's flagship carrier, Caribbean Airways. I didn't know about those things and what they meant, but I know them fairly well nowadays. And I did not know Sonja, but of course I'd heard of Sonja, because of Sonja's stellar academic career, and clearly of her role in the Foreign Service, and of course of her mom, her indomitable, fashionable, passionate, brilliant mom, a stateswoman, Dame Maisie Welch. So I met Sonja at that time. Sonja had no idea who I was, or any of us, but Sonja welcomed my colleague and me into her home, and she took us to visit the ACP Secretariat, and also the Barbados Embassy, introduced us to Ambassador Royal Harris, and to who would be my future colleagues, Huey Allman and Beulah Scantlebury and Gail Thompson. And at the end, Huey Allman and Beulah Scantlebury drove me to Paris. But Sonja explained to me on that occasion the importance of multilateralism, the role of the ACP in Barbados's sugar industry and in tourism. And I soaked up all those details. And by the time I left Brussels, I knew that I wanted to join the Barbados Foreign Service. And so I took every opportunity that I could and to try to pursue a career in the Foreign Service. So really thanks to Sonja, I'm here. So Sonja, I am indebted to you, and I am grateful to you for this opportunity. And it is truly an honor to have the opportunity to be the chair this evening. I don't cry easily, but I feel almost moved to tears having this opportunity to introduce you. So Sonja, again, thanks to you, and welcome everyone this evening. I'd like to thank our sponsors for this 2025 lecture series, and which is hosted by the Barbados Museum and Historical Society and the University of the West Indies Department of History, Philosophy, and Psychology, and supported by the Barbados National Trust. I was introduced as Director General, the first actual Director General in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, because traditionally the ministry had been headed by a permanent secretary. But the Prime Minister took the decision to separate the two roles and to make the Director General responsible for foreign policy and to have the permanent secretary responsible for administration, human resources. Because the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Foreign Service system has become so huge and often convoluted. It's very different from the days when Karl Watson would have served as a diplomat for Barbados. Because back then, Barbados, as a relatively new independent country, was developing a name for itself and building on the post-independence role as a modern state. And it was brave pioneers like Karl and like Sonja, and I see Cecile Humphrey here, as well as Michael King and Yvette Goddard, some of the earlier than me, Foreign Service officers who had the duty and the responsibility to try to establish Barbados's diplomatic presence in the world. Right now Barbados has 18 diplomatic missions, and we are about to open another. We currently have diplomatic missions in North America, in Washington, D.C., in New York, a consulate and a mission to the United Nations, Miami, and in Canada, Ottawa, and a consulate at Toronto. We now have 2 missions in Africa, in Ghana and in Kenya. In Europe, we have missions at Brussels, United Kingdom, Geneva, Switzerland, and more recently in Dublin, Ireland. And in Latin America, we have a presence traditionally in Venezuela, where Karl Watson served, as well as in Brazil and Panama. And we also have a diplomatic presence in Asia, a mission at Beijing, and a newer mission in the United Arab Emirates. So certainly our footprint has expanded quite significantly, and there are plans afoot to establish a diplomatic mission in India coming soon, to try to take advantage. Because certainly, I overheard conversations about tariffs, and certainly the expert is here in Mr. Errol Humphrey. But but certainly we have to try to find ways now of developing new relationships and to try to diversify against the traditional relationships, which we have seen are temperamental and do not always serve our best interests. But I'm talking too much about, but I should probably say a little bit about Sonja. Ambassador Sonja Welch served as, Ambassador Sonja Welch has been a career diplomat before she retired for 31 years and joined the Barbados Foreign Service in 1973. Sonja served in Washington, D.C. from 1975 to 1977 before she left on study leave in Brazil at the Universidade Federal de Bahia. From 1978, Sonja went on to serve as second secretary at the Barbados Embassy in Caracas. That's where she developed a relationship with Karl. And back then, we didn't have an embassy in Brazil, and Venezuela then was one of our strongest partnerships. And Sonja, that embassy where Sonja served covered both Venezuela and Brazil, with multilateral responsibilities for the Latin American economic system. From Venezuela, Sonja went on to study leave to pursue her diploma in international relations at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine, Trinidad. After another stint at headquarters, Culloden Road, Sonja served in Brussels. That's where I met her, that's where our paths crossed, when Sonja served at the Embassy of Barbados in Brussels for 4 years. She returned to Bridgetown and took study leave again to study for her bachelor's in law, her LLB, at UWI St. Augustine. On her return to Barbados, Sonja headed the economic desk before she transferred to London as Minister Consular at the High Commission at London. And Sonja's last post in the Foreign Service was as ambassador to Venezuela from 1998 to 2004. I would go on to say that Foreign Service officers never leave the Foreign Service, even when they go on to exercise other roles. And Sonja continued to use her exceptional skills to serve as Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Attorney General from 2004 to 2008. And from 2008, she served in the Ministry of Community Development. And then she served as the Permanent Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office, and from 2012 to 2017. And her last year, while serving as Permanent Secretary in the Prime Minister's Office, Sonja ended her career also as head of the Public Service of Barbados. So Sonja certainly has had a distinguished career. And allow me to indulge myself once more to say that Sonja was my first mentor in the Foreign Service of Barbados. And I would say that for my entire Foreign Service career, I can identify that I've had 4 mentors. And 3 of them are here tonight. One of them just came in late. He's in the background. And without much more ado, Sonja, I invite you to give your lecture. Over to you, Sonja.
Good evening, all. I hope this is the right height for me. Can you all hear me? Oh, he will come and do it. Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. I first want to thank the museum, Director Alessandra Cummins, for inviting me to do this lecture. and I will explain to you how it all came about, but thank you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. And I also want to say how happy I am to see Karl's family here as well. Patrick, who's been very helpful. And of course, as you say, you never leave your Foreign Service colleagues. So the Foreign Service family is here and other friends, and it's wonderful to see you all. I must say that I have to first thank Donna for being so kind to say those nice words about me. Thank you, Donna. It always gives the mentor pleasure to see the mentee blossom. And to see a mentee who is the Director General, that's certainly blossom. And congratulations on what you've been doing so far, and you have our best wishes. Now, I don't want you to keep you waiting too long, so let me get into the lecture. And I must say you'll be seeing some PowerPoint images, and I hope they will help to expand the story. Watson's foray into foreign affairs. The term foray has two generally accepted meanings, the ancient one being a sudden or brief invasion, attack, or trek into a foreign territory, with a later 19th century meaning being a trek into foreign territory, but more positively used in the sense of travel to or trying out a new area, occupation, or pastime. So when I describe Karl Watson's séjour in the world of foreign affairs as a foray, it's used in this positive sense, because it was new to him. Dr. Karl Stewart Watson was born in Barbados in 1944. His secondary education was at Garrison College, his first degree in history from the new UWI Cave campus. At age 30, in 1972 to 73, Watson was a temporary assistant lecturer at UWI Cave campus, having just completed his MA in history and sociology at the University of Florida. This Watson's World series provides ample evidence of his packed curriculum vitae, highlighting history, heritage, archaeology, as well as the environment. His wide-ranging language skills stand out: French, Spanish, Portuguese, Creole, German, Italian, and Swahili. Add to that his hobbies: water sports, skills equipping him to jump feet or head first into the deep waters of a new career in the public and foreign service of Barbados, and cultural interests like dance. A member of the Barbados Dance Theatre that allowed him to state in a little line in one CV that he had singing and dancing roles in theater in Caracas. His interest in culture also played a role in Frankfurt and in ITB Berlin. My connection with Karl is threefold. First, when still a student at QC, I met him as a friend of my mother, Dame Maisie Barker Welch, when they were both students at UWI Cave campus, taking part in my mother's salon to converse in French or Spanish at Q House, with other persons like Richard Sutherland and the late John Payne. Secondly, I knew him as a colleague when I was posted to Caracas for a 2-year stint, just as he was leaving for Frankfurt. And thirdly, I knew him as a friend with whom my brother Peter and I stayed in Frankfurt, went on a European tour in 1979, as you will see in the photo, and then, as a consular case needing rescue, when unknowingly on my return journey to Luxembourg from Milan, I needed a visa to pass through France by train and had none. More on that later. When on January the 3rd this year, my brother Pedro transmitted to me Karl's request that I do this lecture, I could not but consider it an honor so to do. Karl Watson's entry into the Foreign Service. Some 51 years ago, the allure of external affairs beckoned Karl Watson, and he left academia to join the Ministry of External Affairs from April 1974. In May 1974, he was posted to Caracas, Venezuela, as a senior foreign servicer acting with the equivalent diplomatic rank of consular. This was 8 years after Barbados had obtained independence and had decided to open a diplomatic mission in Venezuela, its first in Latin America. After 4 years in Venezuela, he was then posted to Frankfurt in June 1978 at the same level, but this time with a consular rank of Consul General and a secondment to the Barbados Board of Tourism. He served until 1981 when the bright lights of external and foreign affairs had seemingly dimmed and he was reclaimed by academia. Now, before I go into the details of what these two posts entailed, a little background of the Barbados public service context and the operating framework as a representative abroad is necessary. As indicated above, Karl served in Caracas from 74 to 78, and then in Frankfurt from 78 to 81. His service from 74 to 81 spanned 2 administrations in Barbados. The Prime Minister in 1974 was the Right Honorable L. Walton Barron, now the Right Excellent, with the Foreign Minister being George Moe, and then after the election in 1976, the Honorable Tom Adams was Prime Minister, with the Foreign Minister being Sir Henry, then Henry, de Beaulieu-Ford, and the Tourism Minister being Sir Richard Cheltenham. In Barbados, the Foreign Service is not a separate service. So Barbadian representatives abroad operate within the general Barbados Public Service orders, rules, and regulations. For example, the general orders. Even as they simultaneously operate overseas under the external service, now foreign service, orders in relation to the posting. They can be transferred seamlessly between ministries and agencies of the Barbados Public Service and embassies or consular offices abroad. So it was that Karl's first posting came under the Ministry of External Affairs, now Foreign Affairs, while for his second posting, that came under the Board of Tourism, Ministry of Tourism, but the board is under the ministry, with parallel responsibility for the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation, as Errol Humphrey could tell you, and general consular duties in Frankfurt and surrounding areas. So still under the broad rubric of the Foreign Ministry. Now, diplomat is a term given to persons formally representing their nation's interests abroad. It is even said that diplomacy is the oldest or second oldest profession in the world. Some feel that a diplomat is a man who thinks twice before saying nothing, or that in order to be a diplomat, one must speak a number of languages, including double talk. The following story illustrates the perception of the diplomat as having the gift of the gab. At a formal diplomatic dinner, the waiter tripped while pompously carrying an enormous baked turkey and shattered the beautiful platter in which the turkey was placed. An ominous silence followed. However, uncontrollable laughter broke out in the room a few minutes later when a quick-witted diplomat stood and pronounced, "Mesdames, Monsieur, you've just witnessed 4 international events: the fall of Turkey, the breakup of China, the spillage of Greece, and the frustration of Hungary." He took a bow and sat down. The concept of ambassador or emissary or envoy started from ancient, even biblical times. And we, of course, have heard of the term ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary. Some say that Marco Polo of Venice was the original ambassador. Indeed, we might soon be calling the period from his times to now the golden age of diplomacy, given the onset of a new age starring another Marco. In this regard, I must be careful not to attract the recent fate of a diplomat with a name sounding like a known Barbadian word. Those who know, know. There are two main career streams, the diplomatic and the consular, with consular duties being subsumed into the diplomatic, but not the other way around. The diplomat is accredited officially as in the diplomatic list in the Gaceta Oficial of Venezuela. The multilateral arena can be considered a substream of the diplomatic, as one operates alongside several other countries, usually in relation to a treaty or an organization for a particular purpose, like the United Nations or the Organization of American States. Now, to provide the relevant operating framework for the exercise of diplomacy, etc., nations have adopted two international conventions. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, consisting of 53 articles, and the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations of 1963, consisting of 79 articles. The first was the framework within which Karl operated as consular of the Barbados Embassy in Venezuela, in Caracas, and the second was the framework for Karl's work as Consul General at the Consulate General of Barbados in Frankfurt, Germany. Dr. Karl Watson in Caracas, Venezuela. I will first deal with Karl's work as consular at the Barbados Embassy in Caracas. The Diplomatic Convention's preamble refers to the recognition of the status of diplomatic agents through time, to the UN Charter Principles on the Sovereign Equality of States, international peace and security, and friendly relations among nations, and to the belief that an international convention on diplomatic intercourse, privileges, and immunities would facilitate friendly relations among nations with different constitutional and social systems. However, asserting that the purpose of such privileges and immunities is not to benefit individuals, but to ensure the efficient performance of the functions of a diplomatic mission representing a state. The functions of a diplomatic mission in Article 3 of that convention consist in A, representing the sending state, i.e. Barbados, in the receiving state, i.e. Venezuela, protecting the receiving state, in the receiving state, the interests of the sending state and of its nationals within the limits permitted by international law. C, negotiating with the government of the receiving state. D, ascertaining by all lawful means conditions and developments in the receiving state and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state. And E, promoting friendly relations between the sending state and the receiving state and developing their economic, cultural, and scientific relations. We will compare this later with some of those set out in the Consular Convention. Setting up of an embassy in Caracas, Venezuela. The decision to set up a Barbados embassy in Venezuela was an important one. After independence in 1966, Barbados had joined the OAS in 1967, and by 1974 had formalized diplomatic relations with over 30 countries, including Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. But Barbados had no embassy in Latin America, while Venezuela, on the other hand, was the fourth country to set up a resident embassy in Barbados. Venezuela, the country with the largest known proven reserves of oil in the world, at that time also had the highest per capita income in Latin America, especially after the 1973 5-month OPEC oil embargo, from which it had gained seemingly limitless oil income. As a background note, Venezuela and Guyana had in 1970 concluded the Protocol of Port of Spain, which suspended the Geneva Agreement of 1966 and provided for an initial 12-year period in which neither country would assert any claim to sovereignty over the other in the Essequibo, with the possibility of renewal. So, unlike now, Caribbean countries, including Guyana, could have a normal relationship with Venezuela because that matter was resting for a while. Karl Watson, not previously employed in the Barbados Public Service nor in the Foreign Ministry, was assigned the task of setting up the embassy, a matter in which he had no prior experience, and he had to work in the parallel universes of Barbados and Venezuela, within the limitations of the aforementioned Vienna Convention and the Barbados Public Service structure. It is clear that the task of setting up a diplomatic mission is not for the faint-hearted. Enter the intrepid Watson a la Sherlock Holmes. An essential and necessary survival skill was Karl's expert knowledge of Latin American culture and of Spanish and Portuguese, as the embassy was also to have responsibility for Brazil. He fortunately had the support of one of the best secretaries who ever served in the Barbados public sector, the late Mona Harewood, attaché, who had previously served at the Barbados Embassy in Washington, D.C., and knew all the ropes. Karl also had the valuable assistance of local embassy employees of Caribbean and Barbados nationality, one a former butler to the very dictator, Perez Jimenez, who had on-the-ground knowledge of how government and business function in Caracas. He had relatives and contacts in Venezuela, with two sisters, Linda and Hazel, living there. So he was able to prepare the way for the assumption of office of the first ambassador of Barbados to Venezuela, His Excellency the late Valerie Theodore McComey, former ambassador of Barbados to Washington from 1968 to 74, whose fame preceded him. The first thing that Karl had to do was to find a suitable location for the embassy. With seeming magic, he found it in the penthouse of the then impressive Analco Hilton, a building with 44 floors. In 1974, the Hilton chain had leased the residential Analco building in the Parque Central complex in Caracas for housing for 3,000 plus delegates to the UN Third Law of the Sea Conference. This had been transferred to Caracas from its original site in Chile due to the Allende coup there. The building consists of 44 floors and is 127 meters high, at that time the tallest building in Caracas. Remember that I said the penthouse, with all that implies. What a find. But woe to the staff member on a day when the elevator was inoperable. I know that only too well. Venezuela in the period 1974 to 78. The functions listed in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, Article 3, which I read to you, provide an idea of the diplomatic operating environment of the embassy in Caracas in the period 1974 to 78. Carlos Andrés Pérez of the Socialist Party Acción Democrática had become the president of the Republic of Venezuela from March 1974, the third democratic government in Venezuela after Marcos Pérez Jiménez's dictatorship. This was immediately after the 1973 energy crisis, when Venezuela benefited from the increased oil prices and was called Saudi Venezuela. To show the runaway consumerism in Venezuela, a current joke then was that the most popular phrase associated with Venezuela was, "Está barato, dame dos." It's cheap, give me two of whatever. An activist period was quickly ushered in both Venezuelan domestic and foreign policy. The domestic environment at the time of Karl's onboarding at the embassy was hectic, with the nationalization of the iron and the oil industries and the creation of Petróleos de Venezuela, PDVSA, and countless domestic economic and social initiatives underway, while there was still simmering some domestic guerrilla activity in the country. The accompanying foreign policy saw Venezuela establishing relations with the People's Republic of China, reestablishing relations with Cuba, breaking off diplomatic relations with Uruguay, etc. Venezuela was also actively promoting its third world leadership, with Pérez pushing the concept of the new international economic order and sparring with the USA for leadership of the Americas, initiating the establishment of the new Latin American Economic System, CELA, in 1975, headquartered in Venezuela to promote economic cooperation and social development between Latin American and Caribbean countries. Other important events marked the period. In 1976, Venezuela was elected to the UN Security Council for the second time as a non-permanent member. In addition, Venezuela hosted the third Law of the Sea Conference and the 50th OPEC conference in Caracas. And high-level visits were by President Tito of Yugoslavia and Henry Kissinger in 1976, by the King and Queen of Spain and Leopold Senghor, the President of Senegal in 1977, and by President Videla of Argentina and President Jimmy Carter of the USA in 1978. Wow. President Pérez also established relations with countries from Africa and Asia, undertook official visits into areas in Mexico, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Austria, and supported Panama in its Panama Canal negotiations then. The formerly confidential missives from U.S. diplomats to their head office during this time of hype activity, now accessible online, make for very interesting reading. Of particular interest to Barbados, President Pérez had in motion a special outreach to Caribbean and Central American countries, against the background of the Port of Spain Protocol, of course. In 1975, for example, he chaired and hosted a public-private sector conference on the presence and future of Caribbean tourism. The activist Venezuelan foreign policy started its trend of requiring missions to attend briefings, etc., often at short notice. Maybe the evening before, maybe the same day. Yes. In addition, Caracas hosted a tightly knit diplomatic community with several accredited representatives from many countries. So diplomatic functions were many and varied and required representation by the embassy. Karl would have had the collegiate friendship and support of other CARICOM representatives in Caracas. This was the hectic operating environment in which he was placed. Venezuela was buzzing with activity. It's interesting to note that the only two countries in the Americas at that time to which the Concorde flew regular flights during this period were to Barbados by British Airways and to Caracas by Air France. Now, in terms of the bilateral relationship, a highlight of the relationship during this period was the negotiation of a Barbados-Venezuela cultural and educational agreement. Karl Watson participated actively in the negotiations between Barbados and Venezuela, attending meetings between the Barbadian Minister of Education, Mr. Erskine Sandiford, and his counterpart in Venezuela in April 1975, when discussions started, and arranging visits, meetings, and discussions as it progressed, with the agreement being signed on behalf of Barbados by Foreign Minister Henry Ford in 1978. The existing Barbados-Venezuelan Cultural Center is an important legacy from that time. Watson also facilitated discussions between the University of the West Indies and the Venezuelan government. I'm sure you remember that October 1976 was a flurry of activity when the Cubana Airways flight from Maiquetía to Barbados and Trinidad exploded off Barbados waters, with 73 persons on board perishing. Luckily, Karl had the assistance of Second Secretary Roseanne Osborne for a period of time. In the ensuing to and fro between the mission and headquarters, he would have been required to provide full reports on the reactions and developments in Venezuela. Notably, the embassy also had responsibility for Brazil and had oversight of the execution of the Barbados-Brazil Agreement concerning joint ventures in the fishing sector from February the 15th, 1978. Usually it's called the Shrimp Fishing Agreement. Karl's knowledge of Portuguese came in handy. That was at the bilateral level. Now, this was also Karl's introduction to multilateral diplomacy, with Caracas being the chosen location for important conferences, such as the 5th regular session of the General Conference of OPANAL, Organización para la Proscripción de las Armas Nucleares en América Latina, the Organization for the Prohibition of Nuclear Arms in Latin America, held in Caracas in April 1977. Speaking of OPANAL, recently publicity was given to a regional workshop in Jamaica on April the 3rd this year for Caribbean states signatories of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. I'm sure you saw it. It was co-hosted by OPANAL. Karl and countless Foreign Service officers who have had to wade through the non-ending stream of thick OPANAL documents would have been able to speak to that matter. We have seen photos of Karl attending OPANAL and other meetings in Caracas. In addition to the above, he also served as Barbados representative at the meeting of the Latin American system mentioned before, and even represented Barbados in El Salvador at the Ministerial Council for Education, Science and Culture, SIEC, of the OAS. Given the events and functions set out above, the ambassador and staff at the Embassy of Barbados had a busy agenda. In addition to his representational duties, the newly appointed consular had to send the required reports to the capital and had responsibility for administration. This included preparing budgets and ensuring that Barbados audit rules were followed regarding the mission's expenditure, issuing diplomatic correspondence on various matters, preparing the savings and diplomatic notes, faxes, and correspondence for the diplomatic bag. Barbados government laws, rules, and procedures regarding the locally required staff had to be followed. For example, in Venezuela, there's a 13th month salary, an additional month, paid to locally engaged staff each year, which is not required under Barbados law, but in the posting, the local laws must be followed for local staff, sadly not for the Barbadian diplomats. There was a sizable group of persons of Barbados origin in Venezuela, as many Barbadians, white and black, had relatives living in Venezuela, some employed in the oil industry. The movement between Venezuela and Barbados on Viasa and Biwi was active, with tourists in both directions, and in particular, Venezuelan students wanting to study English in Barbados. Margarita, a Venezuelan free port, thus designated in 1974, attracted Barbadians in droves, so they would have been the required consular assistance to nationals abroad. Obviously, a good knowledge of Spanish and English was essential. On some occasions, Karl also acted as charge d'affaires in the absence of the ambassador. So while he undoubtedly benefited from the leadership and guidance of the experienced Ambassador Valerie McComey and the able assistance of persons like Roseanne Osborne and the aforementioned Mona Harewood and the locally recruited staff, one can say that Dr. Karl Watson earned his salary and allowances. What an onboarding for Karl. Now, on to Frankfurt. Dr. Karl Watson in Frankfurt, a Consulate General in Frankfurt. Frankfurt is one of the 4 main locations for consular representation in Germany, the others being Dusseldorf, Hamburg, Munich, Stuttgart, and Berlin. Since the fall of the wall in 1989, embassies accredited to Germany are now located in Berlin. But Frankfurt has long been a leading commercial, financial, and high technology center in Germany, with an important stock exchange first established in 1585, the world's 3rd oldest and the 12th largest stock exchange by market capitalization. This was where the famed Rothschild banking family started building its international banking empire, and also it's where the European Union's central bank is located. It attracts many annual fairs, as well as being traditionally known for its production of high-quality sausages, Frankfurters. Frankfurt has long been a key transit point for traffic from Switzerland and southern Germany, river, rail, and road, and is still the main traffic hub for Western Germany. Frankfurt Airport is Germany's main international airport, the largest in Germany, and one of the busiest in Europe. Now to Karl Watson's secondment to Frankfurt to be Consul General and to set up the Consulate General. You'll see a listing for him in something called Bavaricon, where the largest state, Bavaria, does its own list of diplomats. And Karl's is there. If you go online now, you can find Karl Watson listed there. Now, the list of functions in Article 5 of the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations is far far more lengthy and specific than that of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. There are 13 subparagraphs in Article 5 of the Consular Convention, compared with the 5 more general subparagraphs in Article 3 of the Diplomatic Convention. They include inter alia, and I only took a few, the following. You hear the difference in specificity. A, protecting in the receiving state, Germany, and more specifically Frankfurt, the interests of the sending state, Barbados, and of its nationals and bodies corporate, within the limits permitted by international law. B, furthering the development of commercial, economic, cultural, and scientific relations between the sending state and the receiving state, and otherwise promoting friendly relations between them in accordance with the provisions of the Convention. C, ascertaining by all lawful means conditions and developments in the commercial, economic, cultural, and scientific life of the receiving state, reporting thereon to the government of the sending state, and giving information to persons, etc. You hear the difference. The commercial is mentioned far more in this. It's not mentioned in the diplomat. It's within there, but not specifically mentioned. These are in addition to the general duty of protection of nationals abroad, assistance to both individuals and corporate bodies, passports, etc., etc. The business interests of a nation are more specifically addressed in the Consular Convention. Nations have generally tolerated this approach to advancing, promoting, and protecting one another's business interests, provided that the activities remain couched in the general business of the nation and do not become out-and-out commercial activities. So it was with the establishment of a Consulate General in Frankfurt. As often happens in our dear Foreign Service, this transfer was at short notice, but by then, Karl Watson had an idea of what was involved. He was notified in February 1978 of his pending transfer on secondment to the Barbados Board of Tourism with added responsibilities for matters related to the Barbados Investment Development Corporation, or then the Barbados Industrial Development Corporation at that time, with effect from May, June 1978. And we have Errol Humphrey here who can attest to that. He was in Brussels at the time. Barbados had a high commission in London, but no embassies in continental Europe, and was just setting up its embassy in Brussels to better articulate interests to the EEC and ACP when Watson assumed duties as Consul General in Frankfurt in 1978. Eventually, the embassy in Brussels would oversee consular and uniconsular jurisdiction over the whole of continental Europe, including the Consulate General at Frankfurt. Germany had no representation in Barbados, but served Barbados from Trinidad and Tobago. The extremely research study on diplomacy and development, published by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1986, coordinated mainly by Teresa Marshall, provides excellent data and background information. I recommend it to you. This data shows that Germany was by far the continental European country with the strongest trade links with Barbados. A few selected figures in Barbados dollars are imports from FRG in 1978, approximately 17 million Barbados dollars. Total exports, 1.8 million from Barbados. Imports from Germany in 1979, approximately 20 million Barbados dollars. Total exports, 863,000 or so. Imports from Germany in 1980, approximately 16 million. Total exports from Barbados, 744,000. And then imports from Germany in 1981, approximately 19 million, with total exports being about 535,880. Now, these figures, though relatively small, were often double the Barbados trade figures with other European countries at that time. The Consulate General in Frankfurt had a narrow focus, different from that in Venezuela. Tourism had continued to be the major generator of foreign exchange in Barbados and the Caribbean, mainly from traditional markets like the UK, the US, and Canada. Most Caribbean countries had tourism promotion offices within their High Commission in London, but very few, if any, had representation in continental Europe. As the first continental European country with which Barbados formalized diplomatic relations on March 14, 1967, it was no surprise that West Germany was the focal point of Barbados tourism and investment thrust in Western Europe. Enter International Caribbean Airways in the 70s. Starting reportedly as a joint venture between Freddie Laker and several Barbados businessmen, with a weekly flight between Barbados and Luxembourg, neighboring Germany, commencing in December 1970. By January 1975, IATA had designated the carrier as a national airline of Barbados. You'll finally see it with the Barbadian flag, with 51% ownership by the government of Barbados and 49% ownership by Laker Airways. With scheduled low-fare passenger operations, it was known until 1976 as International Caribbean Airways and later as Caribbean Airways, not the one you hear about now. This continued until March 1987 when the decision was made that the company should shift its focus to the provision of other services at the Grantley Adams International Airport. So International Caribbean Airways was a big part of all that. 1978 ushered in the initiative by Barbados to have the interests of the border tourism represented in Germany. And there, as in Venezuela, the language element was a key factor. Patrick's wife was telling me the story of when Karl first started to learn German. She knew about then. Yes. So Dr. Watson spoke German. There you have it again. Dr. Gene Holder, in his interesting book on Caribbean tourism, has provided the background to this seemingly new direction in Barbados and Caribbean tourism. Despite the importance of tourism to the region, at that time there was no formal CARICOM tourism plan, and the multilateral lending agencies had no interest in that area. But the picture changed with the signing of the Lomé Convention with the European Union. This was a trade and aid agreement between the European Economic Community and 71 African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. First signed in 1975 in February in Lomé, Togo. There have been many iterations of that since then, but that was the match. According to Holder, in 1978, under the Lomé Convention, the then CTRC, Caribbean Tourism Research Center, contracted 2 German firms to carry out a market study on the potential of tourism from continental Europe. In 1978, too, the CTRC and the CTA, Caribbean Tourism Association, attended the International Tourism Bourse, called the ITB or Berlin Fair, the largest tourism fair, for the first time. It was agreed that the Caribbean would be brought together to take part in the fair in a Caribbean village with funding from the Lomé Convention. This first Caribbean village, deemed the best ITB exhibit in 1979, had a resounding success. EEC funding lasted up to 1987. Holder said that the loud, pulsating Caribbean music was initially attractive, but eventually it was so popular that the organizers were forced to ask the Caribbean to house its ITB representation in hotels rather than at the convention center. It's too good. Alongside persons like the late Carlos Beckles, well known, a Barbadian working at the Consulate General, and others, Dr. Watson participated actively in this energization of the West German tourism market, using his knowledge of Bayesian culture. Again, going to diplomacy and development, this shows that the tourism figures from West Germany for 78 to 82. In these, Germany, compared with all of Europe, is usually half or more of European tourism at that time. 1978, 15,000 or so out of 30,000. 1979, 22,000 or so out of 41,000. 1980, 22,000 or so out of 38,000. 1981, 14,000 out of 29,000. But in 1982, Karl was no longer there. 9,000 out of 21,000. Now, I don't know if he was responsible or not, but certainly in his time there, you certainly were able to see a very active development of that market. Recent information suggests that in 2023, European arrivals were around 24,000, and in 2024, around 26,000, with Germany still leading the way, but with much smaller amounts. The very strong participation by the BTMI, Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc., in this year's ITB suggests a renewal of interest in the promotion of tourism from continental Europe. We must always remember that Karl Watson, Consul General, never missed an opportunity to promote Barbados and Bayesian culture and the Caribbean. But while the tourism aspect dominated his other responsibilities, Watson assisted in other areas. In 1980, he hosted a visit of a team led by the then Prime Minister, the late JMGM Tom Adams, to Frankfurt to promote the Barbados international business and financial services sector there. Errol Humphrey, present here tonight, who was then the BIDC representative and consul at the embassy in Brussels, participated. I hope you can see Errol. He wasn't shaking a leg, but it was a business one, not the tourism finish. Karl also attended air services talks between Barbados and Germany in Bonn. Watson also oversaw the work of the Honorary Consul for Barbados, Axel Schutz-Petzold, in Bremerhaven, North Germany, one of the busiest seaports, who is seen in the photos of the Prime Minister in Frankfurt. Now, I've seen some chuckles, so I have to digress. Our dear Honorary Consul, many years later, not when Karl was the supervisor, but under Michael King, apparently had a cow that strayed and was seized by the municipal authorities. Our Honorary Consul proclaimed that the cow had diplomatic immunity. I don't see that Honorary Consul on our list anymore. I don't know. I'm sure he's not still representing us. Pardon? 3 days after. So I saw the chuckle, so I had to share it with you. But I also know of one consular case that Karl had with one Sonja Welch. And I will share that experience with you briefly. In 1979, having passed through Frankfurt and stayed with Karl, a very kind host, with my brother, We've gone Austria, Germany, and all over Italy, and finally ended in Milan. You know, in Italy, you spend all your money, you only have lira, but you have your train ticket. So I have my train ticket to take me from Milan to Luxembourg and then home to take the Caribbean Airways flight. My brother would have taken from Milan to Dover. And I've said our goodbyes, and I get on my train. And as far as I know, the train is going from Milan to Luxembourg, where I get my flight. So midnight comes, I had my sandwich, and I brushed my teeth, sat back, in there, dozing, and I suddenly hear a knock on the door, "Visa, visa." I said, "Visa? Visa, visa." The border guard. The train was at Basel in Switzerland, about to pass through Bâle in France. I showed him my diplomatic passport, my ticket, but I had no visa. At about 1:30 that morning, Sonja Welch had to get off that train. At Basel train station, he had no mercy. And there am I with my little suitcase. But Switzerland is a very safe country. And I got off. Had some travel experience, so I wasn't nervous. I walked around the area. I saw trains booking station opens at 5 o'clock. This opened at that, so I said, I'm going to plan my time and I'm going to start train booking station to see if I could reroute my ticket through Germany. But I mainly had a lira left, so I couldn't pay the cost of rerouting the travel. And then I said, let me find a number for the Honorary Consul of England and see if they could help me. No dice. I remember that I passed a Swissair office at the station. And I said, why don't I call Karl Watson in Frankfurt, get him to pay for a ticket for me to fly from here to Frankfurt on Swissair, and then we can sort it out. I did that. I called Karl. Within an hour, I was on a coach to the airport, flew to Frankfurt. But would you believe this? Having missed my flight from Luxembourg, the next day, a flight was going from Frankfurt to Barbados. So that was a very successful consular case that Karl had. And I was the beneficiary, and I remain forever grateful to him. So Dr. Watson's stint in Germany was focused and short but impactful, and paved the way for his return to the academic environment, his first love, where he remained for the rest of his working life. Karl Watson's diplomatic and consular career in the Barbados Foreign Service ends in Frankfurt. But there's a little more. 1996, participation in the OAS Electoral Observer Mission to the Surinamese presidential elections. In May 1996, Karl participated in an OAS Electoral Observer Mission to Suriname. Unlike the case so far with Barbados elections, in some countries there are serious electoral challenges. The OAS considerable experience and expertise in hemispheric elections is provided mainly through electoral observation missions. 1996 was the first time since independence from the Netherlands in 1975 that one elected government in Suriname succeeded another in accordance with constitutional provisions. The OAS was the only international organization formally invited to observe that process, with the Netherlands, the US, and Venezuela supporting the mission. It comprised 27 nationals of member countries. There were 10 electoral districts, with more than half of the polling stations in the country being visited on election day. Karl Watson participated in the entire mission from May 9, 1996, until the inauguration of the new president on September the 14th, 1996. Given the history of complex civilian and other deaths that preceded this election, it is clear that Karl Watson enjoyed the thrill of danger. To illustrate this point, I can briefly share my own personal experience in the 1990 electoral observer mission to Haiti. The night before the election, I must say Sonja Welch asked herself, "What are you doing here?" But I was there. We had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out to our first polling station. 5 o'clock in the morning, you go down. The person in charge directs you to the Jeep with your driver who speaks Creole, with your other partner, the Chief Electoral Officer of St. Vincent who speaks English, and the Sonja Welch who speaks French, with walkie-talkies there that don't function. They give you a map, put it in your hand and say to you, "This is your map. Do not give it to the driver. We do not know where their sympathies lie. You have to tell the driver from point to point where next to go." Start in the morning, you go to the furthest polling station, and you drive back in. That day, we drove through a river, got lost, and only found our way back by asking the people, "Where is the river?" No asphalt. You're passing cart road with perhaps some firewood in the corner. So you're going out to the unknown, and they have told you, you can't tell your driver. You can't show him the map. You have to play it by ear. And you have to translate between him and the Chief Electoral Officer of St. Vincent. So I'm not going to dwell on that. Just letting you know, these observation missions can be quite hairy. In fact, on the way back in, by then it was night, and by then I really sympathized with Haiti because coming back in, the only lights that you saw were the lights of another car coming your direction. And as we got near the hotel, we got a message, urgent, urgent. The people at the first polling station that you stopped at before you went out, there's a confusion there, they need you back there. We kept going. We did not go back. That's just to let you see that even after Karl Watson finished his formal diplomatic posting, he still was tempted. We are now at the end of this stage of the journey through Watson's world, in which we have noticed the key importance of language skills in carrying out the two main assignments in Dr. Karl Watson's Foreign Service career. Undoubtedly, it was not always easy sailing for him, but it was clear that his personality, his versatility, and his inability to adjust and to hit the ground running allowed him to succeed. Karl was unique in that he served in both the diplomatic and the consular streams of the Barbados Foreign Service, and participated in the multilateral diplomacy on behalf of Barbados. Very few officers in Barbados Foreign Service have carried out these three distinct functions in one career and in a short period of time, 8 years. Now, I must add a postscript here. There's one additional factor of note in Karl Watson's story. In a country with a post-colonial history, which cannot be overlooked, Dr. Watson came from the white minority in Barbados, which, while being largely represented in the private sector, is underrepresented in the public sector. The report of the Committee for National Reconciliation of 2000 has an interesting reference to this feature of post-colonial Barbadian society. Dr. Watson himself is quoted at paragraph 214 of that report on page 11 in an excerpt that was taken from a lecture that he delivered on August 18, 2000 at the Barbados Museum on the history of white Barbadians from settlement to present day. Referring to the changes occasioned by emancipation and the official abolition of slavery, he notes, and I quote, "Many whites have attempted to cope with these changes by adopting a defensive posture and becoming more withdrawn from general society. For the generation born before independence, these have been difficult times, as great shifts in worldviews and mentalities have been required." Dr. Karl Watson stepped up to the plate and played his full part as a Barbadian citizen in the public and foreign service of Barbados, placing each of his considerable skills and talents at the service of his nation. To borrow from a recent local series on CBC, he was just another Bajan. This extract from the poem The Deserted Village, a very long poem by Oliver Goldsmith, an 18th century Anglo-Irish poet, in relation to the village schoolmaster, could certainly be applied to Dr. Karl Watson, and I quote, "The village all declared how much he knew. 'Twas certain he could write and cipher too. And still they gazed, and still the wonder grew that one small head could carry all he knew." May he rest in peace. I must thank some people before I go. It may be on the screen, but I must say it too. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, Director General Ms. Donna Ford, who's here with us, Permanent Secretary Joanne Skinner, and staff of the ministry, dear Jacqueline Griffith, the Secretary, and Pat Moreno, Bilingual Secretary, Embassy of Barbados in Venezuela, and of course, the indomitable Dr. Alessandra Cummins and Kay Hall, who assisted with incredible information. Also, Marcia Allen of the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. provided me the photos you saw of the delegation at ITB. And I had my own internal support team. My sister Yolande Phillips did the proofreading. My cousin Franchera Ellis, photo organization. My niece Jen Bonnet, who's here, the PowerPoint presentation. And of course, Patrick Watson gave me some lovely photographs. And Patrick, I thank you so very much. And I must also say my brother Peter in Geneva, he put in his 2 cents worth too. So thank you all. It has been a pleasure. And I've come to the end. Thank you very much. Any questions? I don't know what the plan is now.
Okay.
Oh, well.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen,
Any questions?
another round of applause for Sonja Welch, please.
Thank you.
I'm sure after that very interesting and exciting lecture, and I really want to thank you for all of the new information. A lot of it was new to me. Karl Watson, who I only knew fleetingly. But I'd like to invite the audience. I'm sure many of you have questions or observations based on Sonja's lecture. And I'd like to invite you to pose your questions with the microphones that are available to you, including mine. So if there are any questions or any comments from the audience, yeah, please.
Hello,
Sir.
good evening.
Good evening.
I am not familiar to many of you. My name is Arthur. And Mr. Watson has been a part of our project. He's our first speaker, and he's always been there speaking very kindly of our Wax Museum. So, I am here really to make a proposal. I think it's very possible that we can honor Dr. Watson in a way that he will never be forgotten. We can offer him immortality. I propose that we do a depiction. I'm offering it to you for free, as long as you pay for the other half. A depiction of Dr. Watson and one other individual. It could be Dr. Welch, but he has a beard, that's the problem. Or Dr. Marshall. Oh, he's not Dr. Snuffy. What's Snuffy's first name? Trevor Marshall. With Dr. Watson being a member representing one of his ancestors. That would be Washington Franklin in costume. We'll do either Dr. Marshall or Trevor Marshall or Dr. Pedro Welch as right accident busser. No, as I was saying, if you're prepared to pay for the two, I'll give you one for free. I'll give you one for free. You can have it here, or you can have it done by me. It's not a problem, but I'm sure Dr. Watson would have no problem with our approach at offering him immortality. If it's something you want to discuss again, feel free to contact us. Thank you.
Thank you for that proposal. You have to give some consideration. Sonja?
I just want to say that there are a couple of words in Spanish that describe Karl Watson. One is polivalente. Means you can almost do anything. Polifacético. You're capable of so much. And polyglot. He was all those polys. He was debonair. And in fact, the one with the hat, I like the picture with the hat. And the one with him dancing with the elderly lady in Hamburg. He really had a special personality. And I think words can't always do tribute to a person, but I hope that this evening you felt some of that from what I said, because it really was a pleasure to have spent all those years knowing him, from my mother's home as a child growing up to the point where he was able to rescue me and get me back to Barbados. And people who know Karl don't know of his foreign service involvement in the same way. So I hope that the knowledge has been enriched by seeing it fully against the background. Because when you say, set up a mission abroad, can you imagine all the things you have to go through? The logistics, the management. The mind bog, I have never had to set an embassy up and I don't want to. But he did it without having been employed in the foreign service or the public service. So he had to have an amazing skill of capturing things quickly and executing them quickly. And Barbados needs more of that. Thank you.
Sorry, Ambassador Welch.
Matthew.
First of all, thank you so much for showing us a side of Dr. Watson that many of us probably didn't know, myself included. I'm going to ask you a really tough question, Now, with what is happening today with Venezuela and Guyana, what's happening today with the US and the tariffs and this whole new world order that we're going into. Based on your experience of working and knowing Dr. Watson, what do you think his honest opinion would be of where we are today in all of these issues?
He would say it's madness. That would be his honest, because, you know, I don't think can say with any assurance from one minute to the next what is going to happen. And before, and this is where talking about the diplomatic conventions, there was a certain order in which you operated, in which you communicated, channeled information. That is not there now. And therefore, a large part of what you had in diplomacy was trust and respect. Huh? You would not say something if you couldn't say. You see what I mean? If you had an opinion that would be offensive, you may not say it, but you wouldn't say the opposite lie, you know? So people could still kind of understand what you meant, whether you use double speak. I think for me watching, and you say to yourself, how can I operate where if I'm sitting with you and today you tell me, we walk this road, we agree, this is how we'll go. And then by the evening I'm hearing that you're not walking that road. And then I have to come back with you and negotiate with you to walk on the road that you said you were going to and then go on. So, first of all, what you have to do, I think, is to shed any assumptions, except the basic one of whatever you do, have respect for nationhood and for representation. So no matter what the other person does, you will never disrespect a nation or lower the tone of representation. But you have to realize that it really is a new world where you hope you can hold on to some of the old basic patterns, but it's really you have to use all of your senses to capture what's happening, even before you try to make sense of it. You know what I mean? All your senses to capture. And I think in the olden days, we were asked to make notes. I think people have to really seriously make notes almost every day now of things that are happening to see if they can come back a week from now and make sense of it, even though it didn't seem like making sense when you were there. You made the notes. So when you come back to it and look around. So you asked a question, I think he would say frankly, he was a very frank person. It's madness. But we must use diplomacy. We must have proper communication amongst nations. And so you feel it's just a temporary thing. You have to believe it's only temporary, and we get back someday to that diplomatic courtesy and communication that has avoided war. Because if you don't have that, then the next thing is war. So I hope I answered your question. It may not have been what you wanted to hear, but.
Ambassador King? Ambassador King?
Well done, Sonja. My knowledge of Karl Watson goes back to Harrison College. I was about 4 years his junior. But most people do not realize that he was an excellent swimmer who not only represented Harrison College well, and for many years they won the inter-school championship, only losing a couple of times to the foundation school, the boys' foundation school. But he also was an excellent water polo player.
Yes.
And participated with a gentleman whose name you mentioned, the late Richard Sutherland, who unfortunately we lost about 12 days ago in London.
Oh dear.
And Richard from Chelsea Road area, Karl from the corner of Culloden Road, Dalkeith area, Beckles Road area. And they played on the Barbados water polo team in Cali, Colombia in 1971. And they did pretty well. But that's one part that has been missing in all the discussions about the life of Karl Watson.
But no, I have to correct you there. At the beginning, I said his skills in the water allowed
Right.
him to jump either feet or
Yes.
head first into
That's
the
right.
unknown waters of foreign affairs. Not in detail, though, yeah.
But there's also an anecdote. I don't know if this is the right place for it, but our late colleague, Roseanne Osborne, told me this many years ago. She was quite close to Karl also, having worked in Caracas with him. Karl was at Maiquetía Airport, checked in to go to Barbados, given the little card that they gave you as the number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4th person to have checked in. And when he came to get his boarding pass a few minutes later, they told him he was not on the flight.
Oh, dear.
Now, I don't know if many of you remember the days of the standpipe, how people used to behave. But Roseanne told me this, and Karl also said that was a standpipe moment. He jumped on top of the counter in the presence of all the passengers, the Viasa personnel, and told them this plane is not leaving. And in true Barbados vernacular, some with a few expletives, in spite of his diplomatic rank, he told them that there were crooks. And he had to get on that plane. And everybody came running, and all of a sudden, apologies came. But that was a diplomatic moment that sometimes one has to reserve in certain circumstances. May Karl rest in peace.
May he rest in peace, yeah.
Any more questions or comments?
Thank you. Mine is
David
not.
first. And then.
Mine is not a question, but really a commentary. First of all, thanks to my mentor, Sonja Welch, for a very well-researched, deeply researched piece. One of the lasting memories I will take away from her is that she always said to ask the question behind the question behind the question. And I can see that coming through in this very well-researched presentation. I was not fortunate enough to hear a lot about Karl Watson. I vaguely heard that he was in the Foreign Service. And that leads me then to a suggestion. I don't know if it goes to the director or the permanent secretary, but perhaps from time to time, you could organize more of these in-house in the ministry, these presentations. There's a wealth of knowledge that is there among persons like Ambassador King, Ambassador Humphrey, and others. And I think it's important that the current generation of Foreign Service officers understand that they stand on great shoulders. Okay, so I think it's important we do that. And just to say that I arrived late because the former chief of protocol made me late.
Oh, Philip. Hi, Philip.
Thank you. Sonia, thanks a lot for this tour de force and remembering Karl Watson. Just a quick comment. In the photo you showed in Frankfurt, where I was there looking like a neophyte, which I was at the time, it took me back because at that time, that was the first time I was going overseas representing Barbados. I just imposed it to the embassy in Brussels to set up a business development office there. And fortunately for me, I was sent to this meeting in Frankfurt where Tom Adams was basically getting the international business sector going. And I met Karl for the first time there. And in a way, related because he was a foreign service person now involved in tourism. I was a non-foreign service person being involved partially in foreign service and partially in business development. So over the next year and a half, whenever I was in Germany, I had a reason to go into Frankfurt to pick Karl's brain basically about how all this thing works. And he was always very helpful. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He contributed significantly to my being able to settle in Brussels and do what I needed to do. And a lot of people, as David just says, don't recognize what happens sometimes with people like Karl who are not long-term career foreign service officers, who had a role to play and did it very well. For somebody like me who came into the service, in that way, it was very helpful to have someone like Karl to talk with, and that helped a lot. Thank you.
Good memory. Thank you.
And I want to thank you also for that, you, Errol and David, for that suggestion. And we'll certainly use the opportunity to take advantage of that, to invite your knowledge. In the ministry, we have started actually doing that, trying to find ways to encourage the younger, because there used to be officers, to know the history of the ministry, and also to find ways to acquire skills and to preserve the knowledge from the persons who served before. So I really want to thank you both for that suggestion. Alessandra,
Thank you.
our hostess.
Thank you. I'm just standing in for the institutions, but I see my colleague Jeff Ramsey there, and UWI are here in spirit often for these presentations. But I want to thank you, Donna, but most sincerely you, Sonja, because I think for many of us, when we talk about the subject matter, those of us who are not foreign service or diplomatic people, have only the vaguest understanding of what it is you're talking about. You're over there, and we're over here, and sometimes we need you, sometimes you're talking for us, but you're not really understanding the fundamentals of how the Foreign Service has to operate, in what context and in what situations. And what I enjoyed as much as seeing Karl on display and hearing his words and seeing how he functioned, what I most appreciated was you contextualized it. You contextualized it in not just what was important within the Foreign Service terms and conditions of work and in the public sector, but also in the time that it occurred. And that was critically important. So, you know, many of our lecture series are dealing with Barbados history, but we're not understanding that Barbados history happens every day, and it happens in different contexts. And I really appreciate the recommendation about the need for, and particularly for foreign service, because often they're functioning behind the scenes. They're functioning with a specific framework in mind. And people do not have the knowledge and understanding of how you represent and keep the ball rolling for Barbados and Barbadian citizens in a number of ways. So I really think that our colleague's suggestion was an excellent one. But Sonja, again, thank you for showing us this other face of Karl's, this other way in which he performed Barbadian identity in a way that very few people can. Yeah? Yeah.
I wish to thank my niece Jem for the PowerPoint. I hope you enjoy that. I couldn't see it. You could.
Very much. So thank you. Okay, so Sonja, one more final thanks to you, and thank you, sis. Yeah, thank you, Sonja. One more final thanks to you, and I truly, on behalf of everyone, I'm sorry to say, folks, especially the foreign service among us, you always make us proud, and I'm very happy that I had the opportunity to be here to hear directly your representation of Karl Watson's experience in the foreign service. And I truly thank you and appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out tonight. And on behalf of the museum, I'd like to invite you to continue to attend the other lectures in this series, Watson's World. The next topic will be Watson, Art Collector and Collecting. and that will be a panel discussion featuring Ms. Alessandra Cummins, the museum's director, noted historian, cultural icon, and actress, my good friend, Dr. Marcia Burrows, and that will take place on April 30th, 2025. So I invite you to return to the museum to listen to that presentation. So please, there's a reception after, and I'd like to invite you to join us for the reception. So once again, thank you, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.